that wave is a good 15, 20. Get in!
Berangkat ke lokasi bencana gempa dan tsunami di Palu, Sulawesi Tengah.
December 26, 2004, began softly along the shores of Indonesia. The sun was still low, casting warm light over fishing boats tied along the beach. Families who had spent Christmas Eve together were beginning to stir, preparing breakfast or gathering near the water. Tourists stepped onto hotel balconies, admiring the glassy calm of the Indian Ocean, unaware that beneath that calm surface, a force older and more powerful than human history had already been unleashed. What would follow in the next hours would become one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded, an event that would change entire nations and carve itself permanently into the memory of the world. At 7:58 a.m. local time, along the floor of the Indian Ocean near the island of Sumatra, the first sign of disaster seemed deceptively gentle. A faint shudder beneath the feet, a tremor that felt like a passing vibration. Some people felt nothing at all. Others paused briefly in their morning routine, sensing only a small rumble before dismissing it. The epicenter was too far offshore for most communities to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. But in the moments after the seafloor tore open, the ocean began to behave in ways that defied all normal patterns. Along the coast of Aceh in northern Indonesia, fishermen noticed the first ominous changes. The water moved strangely, not in waves, but in a slow, unnatural heaving motion. It felt as if the sea itself were inhaling. Birds that normally soared along the shoreline abruptly turned inland. Dogs barked relentlessly and refused to go near the water. These are signs that indigenous communities had understood for generations, but on this morning, even the elders could not comprehend the scale of what was coming. Then the ocean began to pull back. The receding water exposed vast stretches of seabed that had never been seen before. Coral reefs, seaweed forests, and skeletal remains of ancient marine life lay bare under the rising sun. Fish flopped helplessly on the sand, and curious children ran out to collect them. Tourists pointed their cameras at the unbelievable sight. Many people assumed it was a rare natural phenomenon or a low tide. They could not know that the sea was gathering itself for its return. Further offshore, the displaced water formed a massive wave, silent, dark, and rising. It traveled across the ocean at the speed of a commercial jet. Unlike a normal wave, which breaks gently at the crest, a tsunami carries its energy through the entire water column. It becomes a moving wall of destruction, capable of uprooting forests, pulverizing buildings, and sweeping entire towns away in seconds. When the first wave reached the shores of Aceh in northern Indonesia, it did not appear as a cresting breaker. It rose gradually, like a towering, moving platform of water. Then it slammed forward with unimaginable force. Houses were torn from their foundations and carried inland as if they weighed nothing. Cars floated like toys. The roar of the water drowned out screams, cracking timber and collapsing structures. People clung to anything they could. Tree trunks, floating debris, pieces of rooftops, realizing instantly that they were fighting for their lives. Debris-filled water. A mother holding her son tried to climb to the second floor of her home, only to feel the surge knock them both under. She managed to grip a window frame while waves battered her body, but the current ripped her son from her arms. A fisherman who had spent decades on the water found himself thrown into a violent whirlpool of debris. He survived only because he managed to grasp a large piece of wood as he was swept through the remains of his neighborhood. The tsunami did not behave like a single wave. It came in multiple surges, each one carrying more debris, more destruction, and more force. After the first wave receded, people stumbled through muddy water, believing the worst was over. But within minutes, a second wave surged inland, higher and more violent than the first. Many who had survived the initial strike were swept away in the second assault. By the time the wave reached Sri Lanka, it had traveled thousands of kilometers but had lost none of its power. In the town of Peralaya, one of the most tragic events of the disaster unfolded when the tsunami struck a passenger train, carrying hundreds of people. The force of the water lifted the train off its tracks and hurled it into nearby homes, trapping passengers inside carriages that quickly filled with water. Families clung to each other in darkness as the train shifted and buckled under the pressure. Rescuers later described it as one of the deadliest railway disasters in history, caused not by human error, but by the unstoppable force of the ocean. On the coast of India, fishing villages were obliterated. People awoke to the sound of crashing water and fled barefoot through streets that had turned into rivers. Mothers searching for their missing children screamed into the air, calling names that were swallowed by the noise of the waves. In Tamil Nadu, entire neighborhoods were flattened. Boats were thrown onto roads and rooftops. Marketplaces, houses, and temples were washed away in minutes. In Thailand, on the holiday island of Phuket, tourists were enjoying breakfast on the beach when the ocean suddenly surged upward. Some saw the water rising far offshore and mistook it for a storm. Others stood frozen in disbelief as the sea transformed into a moving wall. One father grabbed his daughter and sprinted through a hotel lobby as the windows shattered and water poured inside. Large beachfront resorts flooded within seconds. Video footage from that day shows people running desperately through swirling water, trying to reach higher ground as furniture, vehicles, and debris crashed around them. The tsunami continued its path westward, reaching the Maldives, Somalia, and even the coast of Kenya. Its reach was so vast that nations separated by thousands of kilometers suffered the same catastrophe within hours of each other. Never before had a single seismic event caused such widespread, simultaneous destruction across so many countries. When the water finally receded, the world saw the scope of the disaster. Vast areas were unrecognizable. Houses had been reduced to fragments. Boats lay stranded far inland. Roads were destroyed. Farmlands were coated in salt water and mud. Everywhere, survivors stumbled among ruins searching for family members, calling out names into an air filled with dust and grief. Some found their loved ones. Others found objects that belonged to them, shoes, toys, clothing, haunting reminders of lives swept away. More than 230,000 people lost their lives. Millions were displaced. Entire communities vanished. The Indian Ocean tsunami became one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. In the days that followed, rescue teams from around the world arrived to search through debris. Medical workers treated the injured in makeshift clinics. Aid organizations set up shelters for people who had lost everything. But the emotional scars remained long after the physical ruins were cleared. Survivors carried memories of the morning when the sea retreated like a whisper and returned like a monster, reshaping their world forever.
Our house is freaking destroyed, Josie! Oh my God!
We're just hearing, as I speak to you, just hearing now from the Press Association saying that London ambulance saying 6 people have injured.
It just went really dark. Me and my friend had to hold on to the railing. It was that windy and it just went completely black, and then just big dust storms flying around everywhere.
On December 7th, 2006, London woke to a cold, gray Thursday that felt like any other. Commuters rushed through the streets holding warm coffee cups. School children chattered on their way to class, and residents in North Kensington glanced at the sky and expected nothing more dramatic than typical winter rain. Yet high above the rooftops, the atmosphere was behaving strangely. Warm, unstable air drifting northward from the English Channel collided with a narrow band of cold Arctic air sweeping downward, creating an invisible tension that only meteorologists might have recognized as dangerous. No alarms were raised, and no one imagined that London, a city known more for drizzle than disaster, was about to experience a tornado. During the mid-morning hours, clouds thickened and the light dimmed, casting a dull metallic tone across residential streets. Rain began to fall in brief, uneven bursts as the air grew increasingly restless. Inside homes, people turned on their lamps early, noticing the sudden darkness but thinking little of it. Outside, wind gusts whipped around corners and rattled fences, but again, nothing unusual enough to create panic. However, subtle signs appeared that something was wrong. Leaves stopped moving, even though the air felt charged. Paper litter settled unnaturally still, and birds vanished from the sky in a way that felt almost rehearsed, as if nature itself was bracing for impact. By late morning, a strange silence settled over the neighborhood of Kensal Rise. The air felt thick and heavy, as though London itself were holding its breath. Residents would later recall how that silence carried an unexplainable sense of tension, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes or storms, but rarely touches this part of the world. Then, without warning, a low rumble rolled through the streets. It began softly, like distant machinery, but grew rapidly in intensity until it resembled the unmistakable sound of a freight train barreling directly toward the neighborhood. Windows trembled in their frames, cars shook in driveways. People turned to look outside, confused and frightened, and that is when they saw it. Descending between 2 rows of Victorian houses was a funnel cloud, thin at first and difficult to comprehend, but undeniably real. As it touched the ground, the funnel expanded and took on a violent rotational structure, pulling debris upward in a chaotic spiral. Roof tiles snapped off buildings like thrown stones, wooden fences shattered into splinters, and a massive tree was ripped from its roots and hurled across a garden. In that moment, London faced a natural disaster that few believed was even possible. The tornado had touched down. Panic erupted instantly. A woman standing in her living room watched in horror as her roof began to lift. She grabbed her child and dashed toward the hallway, a split second before the ceiling tore away and left the room exposed to the storm. A man returning from the shops dropped his bags as he saw the funnel tearing down the street toward him. He sprinted toward a nearby doorway, feeling shards of brick and glass fly past his shoulders. A delivery driver, frozen inside his van, stared directly at the tornado as it passed in front of him, later describing the experience as watching a monster made out of air. The tornado intensified quickly, with debris swirling violently inside its core. Bricks, tiles, branches, shattered glass, and pieces of wood rotating at terrifying speeds. For nearly a minute, the storm carved a direct path through Kensal Rise, stripping roofs, destroying gardens, and snapping trees in half. Entire streets seemed to bend under the sheer force of the rotation. At one local school, a teacher shielded her students as the windows began to bend inward from the pressure. Dust and debris swept into the room as the building groaned, but the structure miraculously held long enough for the tornado to pass. Meteorologists later estimated that the tornado reached speeds close to 130 miles per hour, strong enough to tear apart brick structures and uproot trees. Though classified as an F2 tornado, which would not be considered catastrophic in tornado-prone regions like the central United States, in a densely populated urban area like London, with narrow streets, close-packed homes, and aging structures, the damage was enormous. Residents described seeing doors ripped off hinges, entire chimneys torn away, and cars lifted slightly off the ground or shoved sideways by the force of the wind. As the tornado moved deeper into the neighborhood, it struck Chamberlain Hall Road with full strength, ripping apart rooftops and showering the street with debris. One homeowner described hearing the deep, resonant vibration moments before her windows exploded inward. Another described the sensation of pressure changing so rapidly that her ears popped as if she were in an airplane. In one particularly dramatic account, a man trapped on the upper floor of his house watched the roof peel away piece by piece, exposing him to the open sky while the tornado raged. Emergency services were overwhelmed with calls within seconds of the tornado's touchdown. Residents reported collapsed walls, blocked streets, and downed power lines. The London Fire Brigade rushed to the area, but the tornado moved faster than anyone could track, touching down, lifting, and touching down again with unpredictable swings. When it finally dissipated, the damage path stretched across several streets and left the community in shock. Over 100 properties were damaged, 6 homes were condemned, and dozens of families were displaced. Cars were crushed beneath fallen bricks. Trees lay scattered like broken matchsticks. Debris covered the streets in a chaotic blanket of destruction. And yet the most remarkable part of this disaster was not the violence of the storm itself, but the fact that no one died. Several people were injured, but London had survived something it was never designed to withstand. In the hours after the tornado passed, residents emerged slowly from their homes, some climbing over rubble, others stepping carefully around shattered glass. The sky, which minutes earlier held a swirling funnel cloud, now appeared strangely calm and empty, as if the storm had never existed. Emergency workers went door to door, checking for survivors, guiding injured residents to medical teams, and marking unsafe structures. The air smelled of wet wood, broken brick, and the metallic scent of disrupted earth. As news spread across the country, many people refused to believe it at first. Headlines labeled it the tornado London was never supposed to see, and meteorologists explained that while the UK does experience small tornadoes, they are rarely strong and almost never strike densely populated neighborhoods. What happened in Kensal Rise challenged assumptions about British weather and highlighted how even regions considered safe from severe storms can face moments of extraordinary danger. In the days that followed, engineers examined the structural damage while families sifted through what remained of their homes. Community centers opened to provide temporary shelter, and volunteers arrived with boxes of clothing, food, and blankets. Children drew pictures of swirling gray clouds, trying to make sense of what they had lived through. Conversations echoed with disbelief as people recounted where they stood when the tornado hit, how the noise sounded, and how quickly the world changed. The tornado of December 7, 2006 remains one of the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded in London's history. It lasted only minutes, but left a permanent mark on the people who witnessed it. The unpredictability, the violence, and the eerie calm afterward formed a memory they would never forget. A reminder that even a city as old and familiar as London can face extraordinary moments of natural force. And long after the debris was cleared and the roofs were rebuilt, one thought lingered across the neighborhoods of Kensal Rise, that on an ordinary winter morning, In a city where tornadoes were never meant to happen, the sky opened and revealed a storm no one believed was real.